Montana Territory, 1870. The unforgiving winter had finally surrendered its grip on the land, leaving behind a landscape of vibrant green dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the gentle spring breeze. But for Logan Evans, the 26-year-old cowboy riding the fence line of the Rocking M Ranch, the changing seasons meant little. The frontier had taught him one harsh lesson: attachment only led to pain. Better to drift with the seasons than to put down roots that could be ripped away without warning. Logan adjusted his Stetson, shielding his eyes from the late afternoon sun as he surveyed the rolling hills. His lean, muscular frame had been shaped by years of hard work, his sun-bronzed skin contrasting with eyes the color of a summer sky. Despite his handsome features, a strong jawline softened by youth, light stubble that he kept neatly trimmed, Logan rarely smiled. The West had carved that out of him along with his family, leaving behind a man who believed the frontier was no place for tenderness. "Keep moving," he muttered to his buckskin gelding. "No sense in getting comfortable anywhere." It was the mantra that had kept him alive for the past 8 years, ever since he'd watched helplessly as Blackfoot raiders descended upon his family's homestead. He'd been just 18 then, away hunting when the attack came. He returned to find nothing but ash and graves to dig. Since that day, Logan had vowed never to build anything that could be taken away again. He was good with cattle, better with horses, and kept his promises. It made him valuable to ranchers looking for seasonal help, but he never stayed through winter. Moving on was safer than belonging. The sun was beginning to set as Logan spotted a thin plume of smoke rising from the small homestead that bordered the northern edge of the Rocking M. The property belonged to a widow now, that much he knew from the ranch hand's gossip. The former owner, Delilah Murphy, had been killed in a logging accident just 2 months earlier, leaving behind his young wife to manage alone. "Poor woman ought to sell and head back east," Logan had heard the ranch foreman say. "Frontier's no place for a woman alone." Logan agreed. The West destroyed the unprepared. It was why he'd turned down the foreman's suggestion that he ride by and check on the widow. Not his business, not his problem. He had already stayed at the Rocking M longer than usual. Another week and he'd collect his pay and move on before anyone expected anything more from him. But as darkness approached and the spring air grew chill, Logan found himself studying that steady column of smoke. A storm was brewing on the horizon, heavy clouds gathering to the west. Against his better judgment, he turned his horse toward the Murphy homestead. "Just making sure she hasn't set the place ablaze," he told himself. Nothing more. As he approached, the modest cabin came into view. Despite Delilah Murphy's death, the place looked well kept, split firewood stacked neatly against the side, a small garden plot freshly turned, chickens clucking in a sturdy coop. Logan's eyebrows rose slightly. Whoever Mrs. Murphy was, she wasn't giving up easily. He was about to turn back, satisfied that all was well, when a sharp crack split the air. Logan recognized the sound instantly, an axe striking wood, but followed by a frustrated cry. He dismounted, tethering his horse to a fence post, and rounded the cabin. There stood Delilah Murphy, 19 years old and looking like she belonged anywhere but the Montana wilderness. Her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins, cascading down her back as she struggled with an axe embedded in a log. She wore a simple blue cotton dress, now smudged with dirt, its sleeves rolled up to reveal delicate wrists that seemed entirely unsuited to the task at hand. What struck Logan most, however, wasn't her beauty, though she possessed that in abundance, with high cheekbones flushed from exertion and eyes the color of amber, but rather the fierce determination on her face as she wrenched at the stubborn axe. "You're chopping with the grain," Logan said before he could stop himself. "You need to hit it perpendicular." Delilah Murphy whirled around, startled, the axe momentarily forgotten as she reached for a rifle propped against the woodpile. "That's close enough, stranger," she said, her voice steady despite the alarm in her eyes. "State your business." Logan raised his hands slowly. "Logan Evans, ma'am. I work for the Rocking M, just riding fence lines and saw your smoke. Thought I'd check that everything was in order." Her eyes narrowed, assessing him with a wariness that spoke of lessons already learned about trusting unknown men on the frontier. After a moment, she lowered the rifle slightly, though not completely. "Everything's fine, Mr. Evans. As you can see, I'm managing perfectly well on my own." She gestured to the pitiful stack of kindling beside her, pieces too small to be useful for anything but starting a fire. Logan glanced at the sky. Storm's coming, that wood won't last the night, much less see you through it. I'm aware of the weather, Mr. Evans, her chin lifted defiantly. And I don't recall asking for your assessment of my firewood situation. Something about her pride stirred something in Logan, respect, maybe, or recognition of a familiar stubborn self-reliance. Against his better judgment he stepped forward, careful to move slowly. May I? He asked, gesturing to the axe. Delilah hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. Logan removed his jacket, revealing a worn cotton shirt that stretched across broad shoulders as he gripped the axe. With practiced ease, he positioned a new log, swung, and split it cleanly. You make it look so simple, Delilah muttered. Been doing it since I was 12. He positioned another log. Your husband never showed you. The moment the words left his mouth, Logan regretted them. Pain flashed across her face before she could hide it. Daniel was going to teach me everything, eventually, she said quietly. We'd only been here 8 months when she stopped abruptly, turning away to collect the pieces he'd split. I heard about what happened, Logan said, continuing to work. I'm sorry for your loss. Everyone's sorry, she replied, her voice hardening slightly. But sorry doesn't chop wood or mend fences or keep the wolves away. Logan nodded, understanding all too well. No, it doesn't. They worked in silence as Logan efficiently created a substantial pile of split logs. The first fat raindrops began to fall as he cleaved the final log, the storm arriving right on schedule. You should head back to the ranch, Delilah said, gathering wood into her arms, before it gets worse. Logan looked at the darkening sky, then at the young widow struggling to carry too much wood. The smart thing would be to ride out immediately, to tip his hat, wish her well, and leave her to her fate like everyone else in her life apparently had. Instead, he gathered a large armload of wood. I'll help you get this inside first. Delilah looked like she wanted to refuse but glanced at the increasingly heavy rainfall and nodded. She led the way into the cabin, which was small but surprisingly cozy. A fire burned low in the hearth, a pot of something simmering above it that filled the room with a savory aroma. There were touches of beauty amid the functionality, curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed in the corner, a vase of wildflowers on the table. Logan stacked the wood neatly by the hearth, acutely aware that he was intruding in her space. When he finished, he straightened and found Delilah watching him with a thoughtful expression. Have you eaten, Mr. Evans? She asked suddenly. Logan hesitated. Breaking bread with someone created an obligation, a connection. It was exactly the kind of entanglement he avoided. Outside, lightning cracked, followed by a deafening boom of thunder. The rain was now coming down in sheets. Seems the decision's been made for you, Delilah said with the ghost of a smile. I made stew, it's nothing fancy, but it's hot. I should check on my horse, Logan said, already moving toward the door. There's a lean-to on the north side, Delilah called after him. It's not much, but it'll keep him dry. Minutes later, his horse secured and his own person thoroughly soaked, Logan found himself sitting at Delilah Murphy's table with a bowl of surprisingly good stew before him. The domesticity of the scene made him uneasy. It had been years since he'd eaten a home-cooked meal in someone's actual home. Why are you still here? He asked bluntly between mouthfuls. Most widows would have sold and gone back east by now. If she was offended by his directness, she didn't show it. Instead, she looked around the cabin with a fond expression that puzzled him. This is my home, she said simply. Daniel and I came out here to build something that was ours. Just because he's gone doesn't mean that dream has to die too. Logan shook his head. It's a hard country, Mrs. Murphy, harder still for someone alone. I'm well aware, Mr. Evans, her eyes met his unflinching, but I'm not afraid of hard. I watched my mother raise 4 children alone after my father died in the war. She never gave up, and neither will I. Admirable, Logan said, not unkindly, but foolhardy. The wilderness doesn't care about determination. And where would you have me go? She challenged. Back to St. Louis to live as a burden on relatives, marry the first man who offers security, whether I care for him or not. This land is mine. I may not know everything about surviving here yet, but I can learn. Her words stirred something uncomfortable in Logan's chest. How many times had he moved on rather than face the challenge of belonging, of building something that might last? The storm raged outside, but inside a different kind of tempest brewed, one that threatened the carefully constructed walls Logan had built around himself. As Logan prepared to leave the next morning, the storm having passed, he found himself making an offer that surprised them both. "I could stop by," he said, adjusting his saddle, "show you a few things. Chopping wood properly, maybe fixing that loose board on your chicken coop." Delilah studied him, suspicion evident in her amber eyes. "Why would you do that, Mr. Evans?" Logan couldn't explain the compulsion, so he shrugged. "Neighborly, I suppose." "And what would you expect in return?" Her directness made it clear she'd already faced unwanted propositions from men who saw a young widow as vulnerable. "Nothing," Logan said firmly, meeting her gaze. "Just doing what's right." He didn't tell her he'd be moving on soon anyway, that this strange impulse to help would be satisfied in a week or two, and then she'd never see him again. It seemed kinder to leave that unsaid. "Very well," Delilah finally agreed. "I could use the help with some repairs, but I'll feed you in exchange. I won't accept charity." Logan nodded, respecting her pride. "Deal." He couldn't have known then, as he rode back to the rocking M with the morning sun warming his back, that he had just made a promise that would change everything. Not just for Delilah Murphy, but for himself as well. True to his word, Logan returned 2 days later. He fixed the chicken coop, showed Delilah how to properly chop wood, and ate a meal of fried chicken that reminded him painfully of his mother's cooking. He left quickly afterward, uncomfortable with the memories it stirred, but he came back. Again and again over the following weeks, he found reasons to ride by the Murphy homestead. He taught Delilah how to mend fences, how to predict weather from cloud patterns, how to handle the temperamental plow horse she'd inherited along with the farm. "You're a good teacher," she told him one evening as they sat on her porch, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. "Patient." Logan shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "Just showing you what my pa taught me." "Tell me about him," Delilah said softly. "Your family." Logan stiffened. He never spoke of them, ever, but something about the gentle twilight and Delilah's genuine interest weakened his resolve. "He was a hard man but fair," Logan found himself saying. "Taught me that your word is your bond, that you always finish what you start." He paused, the familiar ache returning. "He and my mother and sisters died 8 years ago. Raid on our homestead." Delilah's hand moved to cover his where it rested on the porch railing. Her touch was warm, anchoring. "I'm sorry, Logan." It was the first time she'd used his given name. Something shifted between them in that moment, a tentative bridge forming over the chasm of their respective losses. "I was away hunting," he continued, the words coming easier now. "Came back to find everything gone." "Everyone gone. So you've been alone ever since," Delilah said, understanding dawning in her eyes, "moving from place to place." Logan nodded, unable to explain how staying put felt like inviting tragedy to find him again. Delilah seemed to read his thoughts anyway. "We can't outrun grief, you know. It follows us wherever we go." "Maybe," Logan conceded, "but I've managed well enough." "Have you?" Her question hung in the air between them, gentle but probing. Before he could answer, she added, "I don't think either of us has to face it alone." The implication of her words sent a jolt of panic through Logan. This was exactly what he'd avoided for years: connection, attachment, the dangerous territory of caring for someone who could be taken away. "Getting late," he said abruptly, standing. "I should head back." Disappointment flickered across Delilah's face, but she nodded. "Will you come tomorrow? The north fence still needs work." Logan hesitated. The sensible thing would be to say no. To collect his pay from the rocking M and move on as planned. He was already 2 weeks past when he would normally have departed. "I'll be here," he heard himself say instead. That night, riding back under a canopy of stars, Logan argued with himself. He was getting too attached to Delilah, to her homestead, to the quiet routines they were establishing. It wasn't safe. It wasn't smart. And yet he couldn't bring himself to break the promise he'd made. The following weeks brought a rhythm to their days. Logan would arrive mid-morning, they would work side by side on whatever needed doing, share the midday meal, and then he would reluctantly return to the rocking M as the sun began to set. Sometimes they talked about books Delilah loved, about Logan's travels, about their hopes and disappointments. Other times they worked in comfortable silence. Logan told himself he was just helping a neighbor in need. That once the most pressing repairs were complete, he would move on as planned. But as spring gave way to early summer, he found more and more reasons to delay his departure. Evans, the foreman, called one evening as Logan returned to the bunkhouse. "Got a letter for you." Logan frowned, taking the envelope. Nobody wrote to him because nobody knew where to find him. That was by design. The letter was from a former employer in Wyoming, offering Logan his old job back with increased pay. It was a good opportunity, exactly the kind of offer the drifting cowboy would normally jump at. "Bad news?" the foreman asked, noting Logan's expression. "No," Logan said, folding the letter. "Just unexpected." That night he lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The Wyoming job was his excuse to leave, to break free of the dangerous attachment forming between himself and Delilah Murphy. It was his chance to return to the safety of detachment, of never staying long enough to lose something that would break him when it was gone. Morning found him riding not west toward Wyoming, but north toward the Murphy homestead, the letter heavy in his pocket. He found Delilah in her garden, kneeling among rows of vegetables, her honey-blonde hair tied back with a blue ribbon that matched her work dress. She looked up at his approach, her face lighting with a smile that made his chest tighten. "You're early today," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. Logan dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "Got something to tell you." Her smile faltered slightly. "That sounds ominous." He handed her the letter, watching as she read it, her expression carefully neutral. "Wyoming," she said finally, looking up at him. "When will you leave?" The question hung between them, weighted with all they hadn't said over the past weeks. Logan had prepared his answer carefully during his sleepless night, a gentle but firm explanation that this was always temporary, that moving on was what he did. Instead, looking into her amber eyes, he found himself saying, "I'm not sure that I am." Delilah's breath caught. "Logan." "I don't know what I'm doing here, Delilah," he admitted, the words coming in a rush. "I should take that job, I should have moved on weeks ago, but every time I think about leaving." He broke off, frustrated with his inability to articulate the storm of feelings inside him. "Then don't," she said simply, stepping closer. "Don't leave." The honesty in her eyes terrified him. "It's not that simple." "It can be." Her hand came up to rest against his cheek. "You've been running for 8 years, Logan. Maybe it's time to stop." Logan closed his eyes, leaning into her touch despite himself. "I don't know how to stay," he confessed. "I don't know how to build something without waiting for it to be destroyed." "Neither do I," Delilah whispered. "Daniel and I were just figuring it out when I lost him, but I think maybe we could learn together." The moment stretched between them, fragile with possibility. Then Logan did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He lowered his head and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing urgency as she responded. Her arms came around his neck, and for the first time in 8 years, Logan felt something like home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Logan rested his forehead against hers. "I'm scared, Delilah," he admitted, "scared of caring this much." "I know," she said, "me too. But I'm more scared of letting fear decide my life." The wisdom in her words penetrated the armor he'd built around himself. Perhaps she was right, perhaps running had never been about freedom, but about fear. Before Logan could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the moment. They turned to see 3 riders approaching from the east, strangers, dusty from the trail, with hard eyes that immediately put Logan on alert. "You expecting visitors?" he asked quietly, moving slightly in front of Delilah. She shook her head. "No one." The riders pulled up a respectful distance from the house. The leader, a weathered man in his 40s with a thick mustache, touched his hat brim. "Afternoon, folks, looking for the Murphy place." "This is it," Delilah said cautiously. "I'm Mrs. Murphy." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Daniel Murphy's widow." "That's right." The 3 men exchanged glances that made Logan's hand drift closer to the revolver at his hip. "Name's Fletcher," the leader said. "These are my associates, Brennan and Collins. We had some business with your late husband. Thought perhaps we might discuss it with you instead." What kind of business? Logan asked, not liking the calculating look in Fletcher's eyes. Private business, Fletcher said pointedly, between Mrs. Murphy and ourselves. Delilah stepped forward. My husband's affairs are my affairs now, Mr. Fletcher. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Mr. Evans. Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Very well. Your husband borrowed a considerable sum from my employer last autumn, $500 to be precise. We've come to collect. Delilah paled. That's impossible. Daniel never mentioned any loan. Got the paper right here, ma'am. Fletcher reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. Signed by Daniel Murphy himself, promising repayment by July 1st of this year. That's 3 weeks from now. Logan took the paper, examining it carefully. The signature did resemble the one he'd seen on some of Daniel's tools and ledgers around the homestead. But something felt off about the whole situation. Who's your employer? Logan asked. Mr. James Blackwell, Fletcher said. Businessman out of Helena, very understanding about your husband's passing, ma'am. He's willing to accept payment in land instead of cash. Logan felt Delilah stiffen beside him. Land. This property would more than cover the debt, Fletcher confirmed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You'd be free to take whatever personal belongings you wish, of course. That's very convenient for Mr. Blackwell, Logan observed coldly, getting a working homestead for the price of a loan that may or may not have existed. Fletcher's smile vanished. You calling me a liar, Cowboy? I'm saying that Mrs. Murphy will need time to verify this claim, Logan responded evenly, and to consult with a lawyer if necessary. The terms are quite clear, Fletcher insisted, his hand moving to rest meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Payment by July 1st or the land is forfeit. Then you'll have your answer by July 1st, Logan said firmly, not before. A tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous shuffling of horses. Finally, Fletcher nodded curtly. 3 weeks, Mrs. Murphy. We'll return for your decision then. He turned his horse, then added over his shoulder, I'd advise against involving your friend here. Mr. Blackwell doesn't appreciate outsiders interfering in his business arrangements. The 3 men rode away, leaving Logan and Delilah standing in stunned silence. Did Daniel ever mention borrowing money? Logan asked once the riders were out of earshot. Delilah shook her head, looking stricken. Never. We were careful with what we had. The only debt was the mortgage with the bank in town, and we were managing that. Could he have kept it from you to avoid worry? Possibly, she admitted, but $500, that's an enormous sum. What would he have needed it for? Logan had no answer, but the sick feeling in his stomach told him Fletcher and his employer weren't interested in honest repayment. This had the hallmarks of a land grab: find a vulnerable homesteader, fabricate a debt, and swoop in to claim valuable property. I need to go into town, Logan decided. Check with the bank, see if anyone remembers Daniel talking about a loan, maybe find out who this Blackwell character is. Delilah nodded, her face resolute despite the fear in her eyes. I'll come with you. No, Logan said firmly. Better if you stay here. I don't trust those men, and I don't want them returning while the place is empty. She looked like she wanted to argue, but finally agreed. Be careful, Logan. Something feels wrong about all this. I know, he kissed her quickly. I'll be back before dark. Keep the rifle close. As Logan rode toward town, his mind raced. The timing of Fletcher's appearance seemed too convenient, just when he was considering staying, just when he was allowing himself to imagine a future with Delilah. It felt like the frontier's cruel reminder that happiness was always temporary, always vulnerable. But beneath that familiar fear, something new was taking root, a fierce determination to protect what mattered, because somehow, without his permission, Delilah Murphy had become the most important thing in his world. The town of Willow Creek was small but growing, with a main street boasting a general store, saloon, bank, and assorted businesses catering to the surrounding ranches and farms. Logan tied his horse outside the bank and went inside, where he was greeted by the bank manager, a thin man named Simmons. Mr. Evans, isn't it? From the Rocking M? Simmons adjusted his spectacles. What can I do for you today? Looking for information about Daniel Murphy, Logan said. Specifically, if he ever mentioned taking out a loan from a man named James Blackwell. Simmons frowned. Blackwell, can't say the name rings a bell. And no, Daniel never mentioned any loans besides his mortgage with us. He was quite punctual with his payments, too. What about large withdrawals? Did Murphy ever take out a substantial sum last autumn? The banker shook his head. Not that I recall. Their account was modest but well maintained. Mrs. Murphy still banks with us, in fact. Logan nodded thoughtfully. Do you know of any businessman named Blackwell operating out of Helena? Someone with enough capital to be lending large sums. I don't, Simmons admitted, but Helena's growing fast, all sorts of new enterprises starting up there. Logan thanked him and headed next to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was a grizzled veteran of the frontier with a reputation for fairness if not always enthusiasm. Blackwell, the sheriff repeated after Logan explained the situation. Name doesn't sound familiar. But I can send a telegram to the Helena sheriff, see if he knows anything. I'd appreciate that, Logan said. These men, Fletcher and his companions, they worry me. The whole thing feels like a swindle. Sheriff Miller nodded gravely. Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried to cheat a widow out of her property. Land's becoming more valuable every year as the railroad expands. That's what I thought, Logan agreed. If Fletcher comes back with friends or starts making threats, can Mrs. Murphy count on your help? The sheriff studied Logan with shrewd eyes. You seem mighty concerned about the widow Murphy's welfare, Evans. Logan met his gaze steadily. I am. A slow smile spread across Miller's weathered face. Good, been worried about that girl trying to make it on her own. I'll keep an eye on her place when I can, and I'll let you know what I hear from Helena. Logan's final stop was the saloon, where information flowed as freely as whiskey for those who knew how to listen. He ordered a beer and found a quiet corner, keeping his ears open for any mention of Blackwell or land deals gone wrong. After an hour, his patience was rewarded when he overheard two cowboys from a neighboring ranch discussing similar collectors visiting a widow near Townsend. Poor woman ended up selling for pennies on the dollar, one said, shaking his head, too scared to fight after they killed her best milk cow as a warning. Heard the same thing happened to old Peterson up north, his companion added. Suddenly owed money to some businessman no one ever heard of before, lost everything. Logan approached their table. This businessman, he wouldn't happen to be named Blackwell, would he? The cowboys exchanged glances. Don't know the name, the first admitted, but the fellas doing the collecting were led by a man called Fletcher, mean piece of work with a mustache like a dead squirrel. That was all Logan needed to hear. He thanked them and quickly finished his beer, eager to return to Delilah with what he'd learned. As he mounted his horse, however, he spotted Fletcher and his men emerging from the general store. Logan pulled his hat lower and turned his horse away, not wanting a confrontation in town. But as he rode past the alley beside the store, he heard Fletcher's voice clearly. Blackwell wants that land cleared by end of month, the man was saying. The widow's got until July 1st officially, but we ain't waiting that long. Too risky with the railroad survey crew coming through. What about the cowboy? Another voice asked, Brennan or Collins, Logan couldn't tell which. If he's smart, he'll stay out of it, Fletcher replied. If not, the implied threat hung in the air. Logan's jaw clenched as he urged his horse forward, resisting the urge to confront them then and there. Better to get back to Delilah and formulate a plan. The mention of a railroad survey crew was illuminating. If the Murphy homestead was on a potential railroad route, its value would increase exponentially. No wonder this Blackwell was so eager to acquire it through any means necessary. The ride back to the homestead seemed interminable. When the cabin finally came into view, Logan felt a rush of relief that quickly turned to alarm. The front door stood open and there was no sign of Delilah. Delilah, he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. He drew his revolver, approaching the cabin cautiously. The interior was in disarray, chairs overturned, cupboard doors hanging open, the quilt dragged halfway off the bed. Signs of a search, not a struggle, Logan noted with momentary relief. Delilah, he called again, moving back outside to check the barn and outbuildings. He found her in the chicken coop, unconscious on the straw-covered floor. A dark bruise was forming on her temple, and blood matted her honey-blonde hair. Delilah, Logan breathed, holstering his weapon and kneeling beside her. Delilah, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, amber eyes cloudy with confusion. "Logan." "I'm here," he said, carefully helping her sit up. "What happened?" Delilah winced, touching her head gingerly. "Two men, not Fletcher, different ones. They said they were just delivering a message, that we should take Mr. Blackwell's offer and be grateful." Fury rose in Logan's chest. "Did they hurt you anywhere else?" She shook her head slowly. "Just when I tried to stop them from going through Daniel's papers, they pushed me and I hit my head on the corner of the feed bin." Her eyes widened suddenly. "The deed, Logan." "They were looking for the deed to the property." "Did they find it?" "No." A small, defiant smile crossed her face despite the pain. "Daniel and I kept it in a place no one would think to look." Logan helped her to her feet, supporting her as they walked back to the cabin. "We need to get you to a doctor." "I'm fine," Delilah insisted, though she leaned heavily against him. "Just a bump." Inside, Logan guided her to a chair and examined her wound more carefully. The cut wasn't deep, but head injuries could be deceptive. "You're staying at the Rocking M tonight," he decided, dampening a cloth to clean the blood from her hair. "It's not safe here." To his surprise, Delilah didn't argue. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Yes," Logan said honestly. "This Blackwell wants your land badly. The railroad's planning a route through this area." Understanding dawned in Delilah's eyes. That's why Daniel was approached by surveyors last fall. They were measuring distances, talking about grade levels. "And suddenly your modest homestead is worth a lot more than $500, Logan concluded. "I heard Fletcher in town. They're not planning to wait until July 1st. They want you gone sooner." "We need proof," Delilah said, her practical nature asserting itself despite the circumstances. "Proof the loan is fraudulent." "I've asked the sheriff to telegraph Helena for information about Blackwell," Logan told her. "But even if the loan is fake, these men are dangerous. They've done this before to others." Delilah's face hardened with determination. "I won't be driven off my land by threats, Logan. Daniel and I chose this place. We worked it together. I won't let some railroad speculator steal it." Looking at her bruised but unbowed, Logan felt a surge of admiration that transcended even his fear for her safety. This was a woman worth fighting for, worth staying for. "We'll fight," he promised, taking her hands in his, "but we do it smart together." As he helped Delilah gather a few essentials for their stay at the Rocking M, Logan made a silent vow. He had spent 8 years running from commitment, from putting down roots that could be torn away. But some things were worth the risk of loss. Some people were worth fighting for, even against the cruel indifference of the frontier. For the first time since losing his family, Logan Evans decided to stand his ground. The foreman of the Rocking M, Walt Simmons, listened grimly to their story as Delilah rested in the ranch house guest room. "Blackwell," he growled. "Name rings a bell now you mention railroads. Slippery character who buys land ahead of planned routes, then sells to the railroad companies at a premium. Heard he's not particular about how he acquires the properties." "Fletcher said something about a survey crew coming through soon," Logan said. "Makes me think they're getting desperate." Walt nodded thoughtfully. "Railroad commission's supposed to announce new routes next month, if Blackwell doesn't own that land by then. He loses his chance at a windfall," Logan finished. "Which is why they're not waiting until July 1st. "You could sell," Walt suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Take what they're offering and start fresh somewhere else." Logan shook his head firmly. "That's not an option." Walt studied him with knowing eyes. "Thought you were moving on soon, Evans. Wyoming, wasn't it?" "Plans change," Logan said simply. A slow smile spread across the foreman's weathered face. "About time," he clapped Logan on the shoulder. "The boys and I will help any way we can. Widow Murphy's a good woman." "She is," Logan agreed, thinking of Delilah's courage. "The best I've ever known." Over the next few days, a plan began to form. Sheriff Miller's telegram from Helena confirmed their suspicions. James Blackwell was known for questionable land acquisitions, but had never been successfully prosecuted. The signature on the loan document, when compared with Daniel's actual handwriting from his ledgers, showed subtle differences that suggested forgery. "It's enough to challenge them legally," the sheriff told Logan when he visited the Rocking M. "But it could take months to resolve in court. Meanwhile, they'll keep applying pressure. We don't have months, Logan said. Fletcher's men have already assaulted Mrs. Murphy once. They won't hesitate to escalate. Sheriff Miller nodded grimly. I can patrol more frequently, but I can't post a deputy there permanently. Just not enough manpower. I understand, Logan said, but if it comes to a confrontation, I'll back you, Miller promised. Just try not to let it come to bloodshed if you can help it. Delilah, meanwhile, had been researching the Railroad Commission's procedures with the help of Walt's wife, Emma. The commission requires proof of clear title before approving any route through private property, she explained to Logan one evening as they sat on the rocking M's porch. If there's a dispute over ownership, they'll reroute rather than get involved. Logan considered this. So if we can stall Blackwell until the commission makes their official survey, they'll see the disputed title and choose a different route, Delilah finished, making my land worthless to Blackwell. It was a sound strategy, but it still required holding off Fletcher and his men for at least 2 weeks. Logan had no illusions about how far they might go to secure the property before then. I'm staying at your homestead, he decided, until this is resolved one way or another. Delilah's amber eyes widened. Logan, that's too dangerous. Fletcher's men are less likely to try anything if I'm there, Logan interrupted gently. Besides, I promised to help you with the north fence, remember, can't break my word. A soft smile curved her lips. Your word is your bond, like your father taught you. Exactly, Logan reached out, tucking a strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear. I made a promise to look after you, Delilah Murphy. I intend to keep it. The following morning, they returned to the homestead, accompanied by 2 ranch hands from the Rocking M who helped reinforce doors and windows before returning to the ranch. Logan moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse into Daniel Murphy's old tool shed, insisting on propriety despite Delilah's offer of the cabin's small spare room. People talk, he explained. And when this is over, I don't want anyone questioning your reputation. Delilah looked at him curiously. When this is over, she repeated. What happens then, Logan? It was the question he had been avoiding, even as the answer became increasingly clear in his heart. 8 years of drifting had never brought him the peace he sought after losing his family, but a few months with Delilah Murphy had begun to heal wounds he'd thought would never close. I was thinking, he said carefully, that the Murphy homestead could use a full-time hand, someone who knows how to mend fences and chop wood properly. Hope sparked in Delilah's eyes. Are you applying for the position, Mr. Evans? Depends on the terms, Logan said, taking a step closer. Would room and board be included? I believe that could be arranged. Delilah's cheeks flushed as she added, though there might be additional considerations to discuss. Logan took her hands in his. Such as whether this arrangement would be as employer and employee, Delilah said, her voice soft but steady, or as husband and wife. Logan's heart thundered in his chest. The old fear rose up, the terror of loving someone who could be taken away, but alongside it came a new understanding, that love was worth the risk, that hiding from attachment meant hiding from life itself. Husband and wife, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, if you'll have me, Delilah Murphy. Her answer was in her kiss, fierce and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Logan rested his forehead against hers. When this trouble with Blackwell is settled, he promised, I'll do this properly, with a ring and whatever else you want. All I want is you, Delilah whispered, safe and here with me. For 5 days they worked the homestead together, always watchful, always prepared for Fletcher's return. Logan repaired fences while Delilah tended her garden and livestock. In the evenings, they planned their future, improvements to the cabin, expanding the farmland, perhaps building a proper ranch house eventually. On the 6th day, Sheriff Miller rode out to inform them that the Railroad Commission's advance team would arrive in the area within the week. Blackwell will know that too, the sheriff warned. Be extra vigilant. He had barely ridden out of sight when 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the homestead, Fletcher and his men, plus 2 others Logan didn't recognize. Stay inside, Logan told Delilah, checking his revolver. Keep the shotgun ready. Be careful, she urged, pressing a quick kiss to his lips before reluctantly retreating to the cabin. Logan walked out to meet the approaching men, stopping beside the large oak tree in the yard. He wanted distance between them and the cabin where Delilah waited. Fletcher reined in 20 yards away, his men spreading out slightly on either side, a tactical position that didn't escape Logan's notice. Evans, Fletcher acknowledged coldly. Still interfering in business that doesn't concern you, I see. Mrs. Murphy's welfare concerns me greatly, Logan replied evenly. As does the fact that your men assaulted her in my absence. Fletcher's eyebrows rose in feigned surprise. Assaulted, I heard she had an unfortunate accident, clumsy thing walking into a feed bin like that. The casual cruelty of the remark made Logan's hand twitch toward his gun, but he restrained himself. 5 against 1 were poor odds, especially with Delilah potentially caught in the crossfire. What do you want, Fletcher? He asked instead. Same as before, the land. Fletcher reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Mr. Blackwell is a generous man. He's increased his offer to $700 cash, more than fair for a grieving widow with no means to work this property alone. Mrs. Murphy isn't alone, Logan said firmly. And she's not interested in selling. Fletcher's expression hardened. Railroad commissions coming through any day now. Once they set that route, this offer disappears. She'd be wise to take it while she can. The commission won't approve a route through disputed property, Logan countered. And the sheriff has enough evidence to challenge the validity of your supposed loan. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Fletcher's face before he masked it with a sneer. Evidence? You mean the word of a widow and a drifting cowhand against a respected businessman? Good luck with that. We also have the testimony of others you've swindled, Logan said, bluffing slightly. People who recognized your methods when they heard what you tried here. The men behind Fletcher shifted uneasily, but their leader remained impassive. Final offer, Evans, take the money, convince the widow to sign the deed over, and both of you can ride away unharmed. Otherwise, he left the threat hanging. Logan stood his ground. Mrs. Murphy and I will be staying right here. This is our home now. Something in his phrasing made Fletcher's eyes narrow. I see how it is. Found yourself a widow with property and thought you'd stake a claim. He spat on the ground. Always some opportunist ready to snatch up a woman with assets. The accusation stung, but Logan refused to be baited. You've delivered your message, now ride out. Fletcher studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Have it your way, Evans. He turned his horse, then added over his shoulder, we'll be seeing you again real soon. Logan watched them ride away, the knot of tension in his stomach only tightening. Fletcher's parting words hadn't been a threat, they'd been a promise. Inside the cabin, Delilah lowered the shotgun as Logan entered. What did they say? They increased their offer, Logan told her, and made it clear they won't give up easily. Delilah's face was pale but determined. How long until the commission arrives? Miller said within the week, if we can hold out until then. Logan didn't finish the thought. They both knew what was at stake. That night, Logan insisted on sleeping in the cabin rather than the tool shed, positioning himself on a bedroll near the door while Delilah took the bed. Neither slept much, listening to every creak and rustle outside. Dawn came without incident, but Logan's instincts told him Fletcher wouldn't wait long to make his move. He was proven right when Walt Simmons rode up shortly after breakfast, his expression grim. Fletcher's gathering men, he reported, 6 or 7 hired guns from the looks of it, buying supplies in town for what they're calling a property reclamation. Logan's jaw tightened. When? Tonight, from what my boys overheard. They plan to drive you off and force Mrs. Murphy to sign before the sheriff can interfere. Delilah, who had joined them on the porch, spoke up. We need to get word to Sheriff Miller. Walt nodded, already sent one of the hands. But Miller's out tracking horse thieves near the pass, might not make it back in time. Logan considered their options. How many men can you spare from the Rocking M? 3, maybe 4, Walt scratched his chin thoughtfully. Not much against Fletcher's crew, but better than nothing. Tell them to come at dusk, Logan decided. We'll set up defensive positions around the cabin. After Walt left, Delilah turned to Logan, her amber eyes troubled. This is becoming a war, Logan, over a piece of land. It's not just land, Logan said, taking her hands in his. It's your home, our home, if you still want it to be. Of course I do, she squeezed his hands. But is it worth risking lives? Logan understood her concern. He'd spent 8 years avoiding such commitments, such risks. But standing there with Delilah, he finally recognized what his father had meant when he spoke of things worth fighting for. Some things are, he said softly, some people are. As the day progressed, they prepared as best they could, moving furniture to create barriers near windows, stockpiling water in case the well access was cut off, checking and cleaning every firearm on the property. By late afternoon, 3 ranch hands from the Rocking M arrived, bringing extra ammunition and grim determination. Logan positioned them strategically, one in the barn loft with a clear view of the approach, another behind the woodpile covering the eastern flank, and the third with Delilah in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor, which offered both protection and a last line of defense. I should be up here with you, Delilah protested as Logan showed her the shotgun's mechanism one final time. You're the last defense if we fail, Logan told her firmly, and you're what matters most. Everything else can be rebuilt. Darkness fell, bringing with it a tense silence broken only by the soft hooting of an owl and the occasional restless shuffling of horses in the barn. Logan took position near the front window, rifle ready, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. The attack, when it came, was surprisingly direct. 8 riders emerged from the tree line, approaching at a steady pace with Fletcher in the lead. Logan could make out shotguns and rifles among them, and the moonlight glinted off drawn revolvers. This is your last chance, Evans, Fletcher called when they were 50 yards out. Send the widow out with the deed, and we'll let you live. You know our answer, Logan shouted back. This land isn't for sale. Fletcher signaled and his men spread out, using trees and the uneven ground for cover as they advanced. The first shot came from the barn loft, the Rocking M hand firing at a rider who ventured too close. The night erupted in gunfire, muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness as bullets thudded into the cabin walls. Logan returned fire methodically, aiming for movement rather than wasting ammunition. He heard a cry as one of his shots found its mark, but Fletcher's men continued their approach, working their way closer to the cabin from multiple angles. A crash from the back of the cabin told Logan they'd broken through the kitchen window. He pivoted, firing twice at a shadow that lunged through the opening. The intruder fell back with a curse, but Logan knew it was only a temporary reprieve. We're outgunned, muttered the ranch hand who'd been positioned at the woodpile and had retreated to the cabin. Blood stained his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. Hold them off as long as you can, Logan ordered, reloading his rifle. Help's coming. He hoped it was true. The ranch hand sent to find Sheriff Miller should have reached town by now, but whether the sheriff would return in time was another question entirely. The gunfight continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Ammunition was running low, and Fletcher's men had worked their way to positions surrounding the cabin. It was only a matter of time before they rushed the building en masse. Logan was considering a desperate sortie to the barn for more ammunition when he heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching at speed from the direction of town. Sheriff's coming, someone shouted from outside, one of Fletcher's men warning the others. The gunfire faltered as Fletcher's crew assessed this new development. Through the window, Logan could see riders approaching, Sheriff Miller at the head of what looked like a dozen men, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes. Fletcher, Miller's voice rang out in the sudden quiet. This is Sheriff Miller. You and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons. A tense silence followed. Logan kept his rifle trained on the door, expecting Fletcher to attempt one last desperate push. Instead, he heard the sound of horses being mounted, of men retreating. Through the window, he saw Fletcher and his remaining men making a break for the trees on the far side of the property, away from the approaching lawmen. After them, Miller ordered, and several of his posse peeled off in pursuit. Logan waited until he heard Miller calling his name before lowering his rifle and moving to the trapdoor that led to the root cellar. It's over, he called down. Sheriff's here. Delilah emerged, pale but composed, the ranch hand following behind her. When she saw Logan, disheveled, a bullet graze on his cheek that he hadn't even noticed in the heat of battle, she flew into his arms. You're hurt, she said, touching his face gently. It's nothing, Logan assured her, holding her close. We're safe now. Outside, Miller was dismounting as Logan and Delilah stepped onto the porch. Behind the sheriff stood several deputies and townsmen, but what caught Logan's attention were the three official-looking men in suits who remained on horseback. Caught them just in time, Miller said, climbing the porch steps. Fletcher and a couple of his boys got away, but we captured the rest. Thank you, Sheriff, Delilah said sincerely. You saved our lives. Miller nodded toward the men in suits. Thank them. Railroad Commission representatives here to survey potential routes. They arrived in town just as your messenger was explaining the situation. One of the suited men urged his horse forward. Mrs. Murphy. I'm Howard Phillips, lead surveyor for the Northwestern Railroad Commission. We understand there's been some trouble regarding your property. Delilah straightened, her chin lifting with the quiet dignity that Logan had come to admire so deeply. Yes, sir, a man named James Blackwell has been attempting to force me to sell through fraudulent claims and intimidation. Phillips exchanged glances with his colleagues. We're familiar with Mr. Blackwell's methods. He's caused similar problems along other proposed routes. Then you know the loan document is a forgery, Logan said, that this entire dispute is manufactured to steal Mrs. Murphy's land before your official survey. We do now, Phillips confirmed. Sheriff Miller has explained the situation thoroughly. I can assure you, Mrs. Murphy, that the Commission takes a very dim view of such tactics. We prefer to work with legitimate landowners through proper channels. Hope flickered in Delilah's eyes, then the route. Will be adjusted to bypass your property entirely, Phillips said firmly. We have alternatives that avoid disputed territories. Mr. Blackwell's speculation strategy depends on inside information about our routes that he should never have had access to in the first place. That leak has been addressed. The relief that washed over Logan was so profound he had to steady himself against the porch railing. It was over, truly over. What about Fletcher and the others? He asked Miller. We'll catch them, the sheriff promised. And with testimony from the men we've already captured, Blackwell himself will finally face charges. His days of land swindling are finished. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the homestead that had nearly cost them everything, Logan looked at Delilah. Despite the night's violence, despite the danger they had faced, she stood tall and unbroken, a woman who had refused to be driven from her home, who had fought for what was hers. In that moment, Logan Evans finally understood what he had been running from all these years. Not just the pain of loss, but the risk of caring so deeply that loss would matter. He had been so focused on avoiding hurt that he'd also avoided living. Sheriff, Logan said suddenly, while you're here, I wonder if you might do us another service. Miller raised an eyebrow. What kind of service? Logan turned to Delilah, taking her hands in his. If Mrs. Murphy is willing, I'd like you to marry us, right here this morning. Delilah's amber eyes widened in surprise. Logan, are you sure? After everything that's happened. I've never been more sure of anything, he interrupted gently. I love you, Delilah Murphy. I don't want to wait another day to start our life together. Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Then yes. Yes, I will marry you, Logan Evans. Sheriff Miller coughed, looking somewhat embarrassed but pleased. Well, I am authorized to perform marriages, though it's not exactly the formal ceremony most ladies hope for. It's perfect, Delilah insisted. This land, this home, it's where our story began. We're better to make our vows. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Logan and Delilah stood before Sheriff Miller on the porch of the cabin they had defended together. The railroad men and ranch hands stood as witnesses, an unlikely congregation for a wedding born from frontier struggle. Do you, Logan Evans, take Delilah Murphy to be your lawfully wedded wife? Miller asked, reading from a small book he carried in his pocket. Logan looked into Delilah's eyes, seeing in them everything he had been searching for during his years of wandering. I do, he said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to stay by your side, to build our home with you, to face whatever comes together. No more running, no more fear of losing what matters. My heart is yours now and always. Tears slipped down Delilah's cheeks as she squeezed his hands. And I, Delilah Murphy, take you, Logan Evans, as my husband. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face the frontier's challenges with you, to create the family we both long for. You came to me when I needed you most, and in helping me, you found your own way home. I will love you all the days of my life." Sheriff Miller pronounced them husband and wife as the morning sun bathed the homestead in golden light. As Logan kissed his bride, he felt the last shadows of his past recede. The frontier would always be harsh, always be unpredictable, but he no longer faced it alone, no longer lived in fear of what it might take from him. Instead, he embraced what it had given him, a woman of remarkable strength, a home worth fighting for, and the courage to love without reservation. In the years that followed, the Evans homestead flourished. The cabin grew into a proper ranch house, surrounded by well-tended fields and grazing cattle. Children's laughter echoed across the land that had once known only gunfire and threats, first a son with Delilah's amber eyes, then twin daughters with Logan's stubborn determination. James Blackwell was eventually brought to justice, his schemes exposed and his ill-gotten properties returned to their rightful owners. Fletcher was captured trying to cross into Canada and faced trial for assault and attempted murder. The railroad came to Willow Creek after all, though its tracks ran 5 miles south of the Evans Ranch, close enough to bring prosperity to the region, far enough to leave their hard-won peace undisturbed. On quiet evenings, Logan and Delilah would sit on their porch, watching their children play in the yard where once they had fought for everything they held dear. Sometimes, Logan would think about the silent promise he had made that first day to help a vulnerable widow with a few simple repairs. A promise that had changed the course of 2 lives forever. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah would ask, her head resting against his shoulder, and Logan would simply smile, his heart full. "That some promises are worth keeping," he would say, "that some journeys are meant to end in coming home."